Today's conversation is sponsored by First Generation Capital Partners.
If somebody's not meeting expectations after you hold them accountable, you need to rip that Band-Aid off ASAP. You cannot be thinking, well, maybe they'll get better. You rip that Band-Aid off as fast as you can. You deal with the pain immediately, and then you go fix it and learn from your mistakes.
You're listening to the Going Long podcast with Billy Keels, the #1 podcast for long-distance real asset investing.
Welcome to the Going Long podcast. We're back once again to continue to help educate you so you feel much more comfortable as well as confident investing beyond your backyard. And yep, I'm your host, Billy Keels, and we're back for another amazing conversation with a fantastic, phenomenal, informative guest. And before we get into the conversation, just want to say a couple things. Really appreciate you continuing to be a loyal Going Long listener and family member. Really appreciate that. And for those of you who continue to plaster across social media and tag us on LinkedIn and Instagram, we really appreciate that. So continue to do that. And if you want to leave your honest written review as well as rating, we've got a nice little video that you can do that on the Apple Podcast platform. And for those of you who also want to check out some of the previous episodes, which there are well over 300 episodes at this point in time of our top 1.5% rated podcast globally, just go over to firstgencp.com/podcast and you can find every single thing that you would ever need over there. So I want to talk to you really quickly about today's guest. You're going to get a lot out of the conversation, especially if you are someone who is in a corporate role. You have been there and you're enjoying it. And you also realize, hey, look, maybe you have a lot of windshield time and you're trying to figure out that, something else is out there. I've been listening. I want to find out a little bit more about how I can do this or what are some of the different things that I should be thinking about so that you can feel comfortable moving forward sooner. We have a guest who's actually been in your shoes. He was in corporate. He was successful in corporate, especially on the marketing and sales side of things. That hopefully rings a bell for many of you. And at the same time, he's gotten to a point where he was able to, make his 9-to-5 optional, and he's moved into doing investing full time. And so I know you're going to get a lot out of today's conversation with Mr. Ross McArthur, and we're going to get to that conversation just after this. So if you want to understand the importance of being able to follow the deal in your long distance investing success, then guess what? Today's the conversation that you're going to want to listen to until the very, and I promise, very last word. You know why? Because today's guest, not only after university, he started in sales for a market leading brand, and I'm sure he'll probably tell us a little bit more about that. And then afterwards, he spent about 5 years helping people in the automotive industry, or specifically big businesses, thrive in the digital space. And wow, that sounds really cool because I came from an IT background, so I'm sure you're going to learn a lot about that. And then he also spent almost a decade with a very large retail firm in different roles like marketing, love that, sales, as well as area VP for strategic accounts. Wow, you got a lot of people that are in sales here that are really going to love that. And today he continues to be the owner of McArthur Holdings, as well as the co-founder of Follow the Deal Investments. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to today's conversation, Mr. Ross McArthur. Ross, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you so much, man. This is going to be fun. I got to listen a little bit of your podcast and some of the from where you started to where you're at now. And I think this is going to be a fun episode, hopefully, for everybody.
Well, I'm sure they're going to learn a lot, and they're probably going to laugh one or two times. Like if you went back to the very first episode, you can laugh a lot. We've learned one or two things over the last, just over 3.5 years, and still in the top 1.5% of podcasts globally. So we're pretty excited about that, and I'm sure that they're going to learn a lot. So Ross, let's jump right in, man, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely. Let's go.
One of the things I really want to understand always, even though I'm a guy from the Midwest who's called Europe home for the last, over 2 decades, help us understand, where exactly do you call home, Ross?
Yeah, so what I call home and where I'm from are different, but where I call home is, I say Orlando, Florida. All the European listeners know that well. It's a huge tourist spot for Europeans, but specifically Claremont, Florida, so about 45 minutes west of the Orlando airport.
All right, fantastic. Yeah, I think there's a specific little mouse that tends to draw a lot of people to the big O, as they call it. So Orlando. Appreciate you sharing that. And then the other thing is, I love to start out with some positivity. So help us understand, Ross, what's been the most positive thing that's happened to or for you in the last 24 hours?
So I was kind of thinking about, I was talking with my wife earlier about this, like what's a good answer, what's kind of been going on. And I think, this will play well to your travel question, I think we'll talk about later. But I officially booked a trip for my dad, who just at the time when we go will be 76 years old, and my younger brother to go to Ireland. I've been once, one of my favorite places, and they've never been. So next September, we're going to go do that as a family, which is pretty cool. Just a little bonding trip. So pretty grateful for being able to actually do that for them and go spend some one-on-one time as my dad gets older.
Oh man, that's absolutely fantastic. And if it's their first time, they're going to adore it. Just know, if you've already been there, they're going to be really leaning on you a lot to lead everything. So,
100%.
So enjoy it. Now, here's the thing. I appreciate you sharing that with us. And you probably already know this, but I'm a recovering perfectionist and I try to do things that, well, sometimes are impossible. Like tell about all the things that you've done up to this point in your life in like 2.5 seconds, I think is what I tried to do it in today. Was never going to happen. So hopefully you will be kind enough to help me so that the Going Long family can know more about you by having you tell your backstory. And Ross, one of the other things that I would also like to ask, since I'm asking for things as the host of the show, is if you could also talk to us about some of the major, let's call them challenges that you've had and kind of some of the major decisions that you made to get to this point in your journey. And then we'll see where you and I take the conversation from there.
Awesome. Well, as one perfectionist to another, one type A personality to another, I can relate. So let's go like that. But yeah, as Billy mentioned, my name is Ross McArthur. Where I live and where I'm from are very different. So I am a Midwesterner as well. So I grew up in Michigan, born and raised, and like most people, I went to school or university. But I had no idea what I wanted to be when I grew up. So sales and corporate sales is one. I mean, I honestly think it's one of the best jobs you can get into as a young individual trying to, create a good living and good foundation for yourself. So I took a job and moved anywhere they'd send me. Happened to be Portland, Oregon. So I moved out west for a few years, then moved to Pennsylvania. That was another 3-year stint, and ultimately in Florida for almost the last 12. So corporate sales, it was granted us a lot of things. Bill, you know this with all your travel and all the things you've done. But I kind of felt like I was on a hamster wheel. And I think one of the things that was interesting throughout the years, you run into people who've been uber successful as an entrepreneur. And I always had a little bit of an entrepreneurship bug, but I didn't really have anybody in my close network who did real estate or owned a business, but there was like this internal calling. And so like most people in sales, you have a lot of windshield time, a lot of travel time. So I plugged into things just like you're doing here. I listened to every podcast I could. I read every book. And in January 2020, my wife and I finally decided, hey, like let's actively start buying real estate. We knew that was our niche or our hard asset that we wanted to get involved with. And anytime you have a husband, wife, or a couple who is making a big lifetime decision, I'll put it that, or life-changing decision, there's usually one that's a little more conservative and one that's a little more aggressive. I'll let you guys decide who is who. But to easy to say, I'm the one who's a little more calculated and aggressive, and she's the one who's a little more conservative. But after a few late nights talking about, we dove in. And so we bought a fourplex in small town Indiana. Traditional 20-25% down was the scariest thing I've ever done. And then, it went pretty well. We weren't getting rich. We're, buying Chipotle every so often, essentially off of it. But, it was going relatively smoothly. So we decided, hey, let's double down and let's do some more. And so we had a goal of buying 10 units that first year. We blew past that and was able to get to 25. And one of the main reasons why is we really figured out how to velocitize our money, which I think is a lot of why people buy into hard assets to begin with. What I mean by velocitize our money is we would buy something at a discount, we'd find a lender, and we'd be able to refinance back out of that property immediately. So a quick example, real numbers, because we're all probably number people. But if we thought that unit or that property would appraise for $100,000, I wanted to buy it for $75,000. And then I would go to the bank, it would appraise for $100,000, and I'd get my $75,000 back. And when we realized that, we were like, pedal to the metal, let's go. And that's what really created the foundation of what we do today. So we quickly grew that to about 120 units over a course of about 2 years, or about $7 million of real estate assets. And in the meantime, while we were doing all this, we kept getting calls on single family houses. And Bill, you know better than anybody. Usually people are either single family, small multifamily, or large multifamily. They don't usually dabble in all. So we did not dabble in single family at all, but we just had these opportunities. So my wife said one day, well, why don't we try to flip a house? And by the way, we live in Florida. This is all in Indiana still. So 2,000 miles away. I think, people in Europe, 5,000 miles away from the United States can relate to that. But so we decided to start flipping houses as well while this was all going on. And I call ourselves the accidental flippers. So we went from one, which did well, we made money, to now we do about 30 a year. So that takes us right up to 2022, and a little long-winded, but that gives you a little backstory about where we started. And then in 2022, my now partner, Stan Remling, and I decided, how do you go bigger? Right? Conversation we all have all the time. How do we go bigger? And we decided, why don't we form a group investing company that targets 20 to 150 unit apartment complexes? And so over the last year and a half, we've really focused heavily on that, and we've acquired about 600 units to date. So we have about 700 units in our portfolio. We are all in on real estate, and today's treated us very well. So hopefully that gives at least a high level analysis and a high level introduction to all the guests.
Yeah, so I appreciate you sharing that with us. And so you have two guys from the Midwest. We actually also went to the same conference in terms of university and all that kind of jazz, but we'll talk about that later, as well as maybe some tips on traveling in Ireland. Well, never mind. You know all that already, so I'm going to leave that on you. There's a couple things that you talked about, though, right? There's the velocity of money. I'm sure we're going to come back to that, but I'm always curious because you're very similar. Like, you didn't have a background where you were surrounded by people in real estate. You had a lot of window time that you talked about before, but I'm sure during the window time, there were a number of different things that you could have decided to move forward on. I don't know if at that point in time, this whole concept of velocity of money had already become crystallized because you were still listening, but help us just for that. Cause I was very similar to you. Like, I was in a high paid corporate job, making, 6 figures and massive bonuses and all that other kind of stuff. But real estate was the thing that resonated with me. And I never was surrounded by anybody around it. I had specific reasons for it. But that was just based on the theory that I was listening to. Maybe you could give us some insight into what it was that you were listening to during that windshield time that made you think, this is the place where I want to kind of start my bets.
Yeah, so it's not just what I was listening to, it's what happened around me. So Midwest to Midwest, right? What dominates Midwest is automotive, right? Michigan particularly, it was formerly the big three. And so most of my family and my wife's family worked for GM or Chrysler and things like that. What happened is, during this younger part of my career was one of the great recessions, right? And we've seen that. And I remember vividly my father-in-law coming in and said, my 401k and my stock shares were just cut in half. I'm going to have to work another 10 years to recoup this. And I was planning on retiring next year. And so that's what, you talked about, deciding on real estate. That was one of the main factors that got me to the podcast, that got me to the book. The other thing is, I really got frustrated when I could not figure out the stock market. And what I mean by that is, one day stock would go up, next day it would go down. There wasn't really a 100% answer of why. There's some theories, and there's a lot of smart people out there who invest heavily in that, but I couldn't figure it out myself. And I felt like that was essentially white collar gambling. And so for me, real estate, to your point, what you always use as hard asset, it's tangible. There's only so much of it in the world. And so that, along with my father-in-law's stories, kind of got me to the podcast and learning in the education phase. And then when I started doing, then the velocity of money concept came in. But it wasn't prior to that. So it's almost like I got hooked on the idea of real estate. And then when I started taking action and doing, that's what took me to the next level. And I saw things really happen. I always remember my wife, when we refinanced one of those properties and we got money back, like more money than we put into the deal. Like, we got a check for $10,000. She was like, oh, this is real. Like, oh, wow. That's what takes, I think, theories and ideas and concepts to the next level when you actually see it come to fruition.
Yeah. And I appreciate that. So, taking those theories and concepts to the next level, and it coming back even before, as you talked about those two different events. So you have the 401k story from your uncle, and also not being able to understand the market, because I think it's Tony Robbins that says, you're either running towards something or running away from something. And so maybe this fear of that same thing happening to you actually pushed you to look for, or at least be open to new ideas and opportunities. So for that person who's maybe driving or listening or working out on the treadmill, and you're in that same space that Ross was in, well, look, it's very similar. No one has done this for the first time ever, because we all have similar patterns. So just be open to that and listen to Ross's story as he shares, because maybe the same thing is happening to you today. So just to maybe take another thing. So you talked about the velocity of money, but I also know that you happen to have a big focus on being able to follow the deal, right? And so so much to the point that even your company is named after that, or named in a certain way. So talk to us about the importance to you of being able to follow the deal, and kind of what other areas would support that as you follow the deal.
So I'll give a little context to why we even branded the company that way. It doesn't make a lot of sense to other people outside of just being simple, like follow the deal, duh, right? But what would happen with my partner Stan and I, when we were investing in small multifamily, it was all new. And I'd say, example, like, hey Stan, what do you think about this, property? He'd be like, well, is it a deal? And I was like, yeah, it's a deal. He's like, follow the deal then, buy it. And so that kind of resonated to everything we do. And so I think we're opportunistic buyers, for lack of a better word. And so I don't look at things for appreciation. I look at things of what they can produce return now with greater upside. And so every deal we look at, we want to cash flow today, and we want to obviously significantly cash flow better in the future. And so that's just our mindset. There's a lot of people who buy for different reasons and different criteria, but for us, that's what classifies as a deal.
Okay. And I appreciate you breaking that down, which actually leads me to another question, because it's kind of like, all right, well, you buy for it to be able to produce today. You're able to look at that, model it so that it produces potentially more in the future, right? With no one has a crystal ball, but based on your modeling, things like that, I'm sure that happens. But it also makes me think about two things that you said. Actually, one thing that you said and one thing that I said. I know that you were focused on automotive industry, really on the digital side of things, maybe one of the retailers that you were also working with, there's some focus there. But then you even mentioned that your family, working in some of the big three and being where you were from, there's this whole concept of, I used to work for a very large ERP vendor. And so I think a lot of times about industries and what happens in an industry. And it sounds to me like, based on even family to areas that you worked in, there's this idea of being able to specialize in something. And you also talked about you and your partner really focusing on those properties that were anywhere between 20 to 150 units. So talk to us about how you're actually leveraging what you've done or seen from an industry and your corporate perspective to how that's actually helping you become or be more successful today.
Yeah, so we're probably pretty similar in age. So I'm gonna be 40 coming up, and thank you so much.
Yeah, you're so kind.
I wasn't gonna guess.
You're way off, but that's okay in a nice way. I'll tell you later.
So 20 years in corporate America, essentially, for coming up with, at least in my lifetime, that's over half my life, right? Mm-hmm. And you do learn a lot. And I didn't start investing in real estate really till 36, 37, and so there was, to your point, a ton of lessons learned in that first 15 years. I think the biggest lesson, biggest takeaway I always give is business, real estate, investing. It doesn't really matter. It boils down to three things. It's people, process, and technology, right? So people is the hardest one, no matter what. And so that was true as a VP, having the right people around you. And it's surely, right partners and right vendors in real estate, as an example. Process, everything's a process. Your show is a process. Before we came on, you had a step-by-step thing that you did to set up success for this podcast. That's part of your process. So everything's processes, or I can't ever say that correctly, processes.
Yeah. You got it, man. Processes, tomato, it's all good.
So, and then technology makes the first two somewhat easier, right? And so what I really found is when you simplify real estate investing into those categories, it's no different than what you do every day at your corporate job. And I think that's where people complicate investing. And so I think I learned that early on, and that helped me helped us a ton, I should say.
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing that, because it does come down to, people, process, and technology, and being able to do them. And and do them effectively, or have each area done effectively. And so, there's a lot of times corporate gets a really bad rap. And, whether I'm, looking at other posts that are on LinkedIn, because I like to post a lot on LinkedIn and stuff like that, of course. And, leave your corporate job and it's terrible and all this kind of stuff. I'm thinking, well, no, that's not really. I mean, corporate is there. It's an asset that you can utilize. You're also an asset for the corporation, but there's so many skills that you can build that you can then leverage if you decide that you want to make that 9 to 5 optional. And so the fact that you are, just aware of that, those skills that you were able to build and you're able to leverage them today, I think is absolutely fantastic, because there are a lot of us that are out there like that, but it tends to be the people that complain the most that get the biggest audiences and all that other kind of jazz. But so talk to us a little bit about that, because as you're in Florida, you continue to build and you're doing this in a way that is remote. And when I got started with this podcast back in 2020, it seemed like it was, science fiction to be able to be one place and be a couple thousand miles away. I'm at an extreme because I'm doing it across continents. But there, whether you're in California or you're in Florida and you're purchasing in the Midwest, it's a very, very similar thing. So talk to us about some of the things that you have seen that work well, maybe 1 or 2 mistakes that have happened, or maybe save those for later. No, some of the things that you've done to actually build teams effectively.
Yeah, well, I mean, partnerships in the whole are pretty, whether third party or actual partners is, like I said, one of the toughest things in this. So I think, setting expectations is, I think, a key thing to a profitable and successful relationship, right? And building a team. So, I, again, learned that early on in a W-2 job is that's key to success. You can't hold people accountable unless you tell them what you're going to hold them accountable for. So step 1. And then step 2 of that is then you have to inspect what you expect. And so I got significantly better at that as the years went on, even though I've always had that in the back of my head, lessons learned. And we'll, like you said, talk about that probably later. But, that is one of the key to successes in, like I said, in W-2 and in real estate. So that has really helped us build a quality team around us and quality partners. But I think the other thing is you have to realize, if somebody's not meeting expectations after you hold them accountable, you need to rip that Band-Aid off ASAP. Like, you cannot be thinking, well, maybe they'll get better. We'll last another 3 months, turns into 6 turns into 12. You rip that Band-Aid off as fast as you can. You deal with the pain immediately, and then you go fix it and learn from your mistakes. So hopefully that answers your question well. But for us, that is something I think we've done really good at overall. Could we get better? 100%. But I think we've excelled in that category.
Well, and I appreciate you being able to, break that down and seeing once again, over time, this is something that you get better at. It means that there's probably things that didn't work perfectly, but as long as you had your people in place, you had your process, and you were leveraging your technology, because those are 3 key pillars, especially when you're in one place and investing in another, to be able to minimize or maximize the amount of growth that happens, and also be ready for the things that are going to go wrong. And so being able to recognize where that all comes into play. So one other thing that I did want to ask you, and I know pretty soon we need to be getting to our going long final 3, because everybody wants to hear the going long final 3. So tell us a little bit about, because you've talked around some of the things that you're doing today, but kind of the genesis of Follow the Deal Investments and kind of what it is that you are doing today, how you're helping others.
Yeah, so I think it goes along with a lot of the things you talked about in the past, but a lot of people have W-2 jobs. They're not unhappy. I think there's this propaganda out there that people are miserable who work W-2 jobs. It's not true, right? That's just, it's trying to get clicks, right? But I was never unhappy. And most of my friends who I align with are doing very well at their W-2s. I just personally love real estate and investing in that and wanted to take control of my time a little bit more. So when I started investing way back when in 2020, all our friends and family would be asking me about it, just like what your investments, right? They'd be like, hey, tell me about that. Every time you'd go have a drink or dinner with somebody, that's the main part of the topic. And so a lot of people would ask more structured questions like, how do I do this? How did you get started? But what I found was I'd have deja vu with these same people over and over again. So the next Friday, I'd have the same conversation. The Friday after that, I'd have the same conversation. So when we founded Follow the Deal, it was only meant for Stan and I. It wasn't actually a group investing company. It was just our company to invest in larger assets. But what we found out was my neighbor Ryan, well, one night was like, how about I just give you $100,000 and you go do it for me? Because clearly I don't have the time, energy, and effort to do this. And a light bulb kind of went on in that moment. Like, we're surrounded by high performing corporate America individuals. Like, Ryan's just one. There's 100 or 50 other Ryans that we're friends with that trust us and know we're pretty good at what we do. They probably want to invest too. And that's when the light bulb went off. And that's when Follow the Deal actually became a group investing or a syndication company. So we keep it pretty close today, but that's our passion. Was really, we're such believers in it. We realize that a lot of our family and friends are never going to spend the time to do it. So at least, hey, it's a win-win. We can lever up and go after larger assets, and they can get a huge return or a very strong return investing with us. So that's kind of the start to finish.
Yeah, and so I appreciate you sharing that. And a lot of times it is you're looking to solve your own issue, right? And sometimes and I always like to say we're really talking about first world issues here. So when we want to solve our own issue, and then being able to also talk about that, or people have interest in, and then it will transform over time if you so choose that you want to be able to do that. So appreciate you sharing the genesis and also kind of where you are today and who you're helping, and appreciate that. And Ross, true to form, man, we got to get to the going long final three, but I never ask anybody. Since you're our special guest today, I'm going to ask you: Are you ready?
I'm ready. I got hopefully a decent answer for you.
You know what? I think you hopefully have three decent answers for me. But I'm gonna guess you have three solid answers. So, in the very first one, you've kind of told us a little bit about your travels. I know a little bit more because you and I chatted before. But two Midwest guys, this guy from Ohio has decided to call home over here in Europe for the last 22 years. So I always want to know, like, what is your favorite European city that you've either visited or still on your bucket list to visit?
Yeah, so there's a lot on the bucket list. As I mentioned prior, we really got the travel bug, European travel bug, a couple years ago. So we just got back from a Mediterranean cruise. But I mentioned earlier about taking my dad to Ireland. So I'm going to go outside the box a little bit here. There's a little tiny town, and you're probably familiar with it, called Doolin, where the Cliffs of Moher is in Ireland. And it's no joke, a 3-pub town. And that's really why you stay there, is to go see the cliffs. And we just had a blast. It was my wife and my partner Stan and his wife. And if you guys ever get a chance, that should be the first stop you go to, because it is such a cool little town and just a beautiful sight.
And after you see the cliffs, I'm sure one or two people have also stopped at those 3 pubs, but that's a whole different topic. We can talk about that later. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, Ross. And question number 2 really comes down to, and I used to have this really long, drawn out kind of thing, but I would just kind of ask you. But as you've gone from where you started to where you are today, I'm going to guess that not every single thing has gone perfectly. And if that is in fact the case, because I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone who's had every single thing go perfectly, I want you to not think about, like, especially in whatever aspect it has to do with investing, like, don't think about the mistake that happened, but what was the lesson that you learned along the way that you really know by sharing that lesson today, it's going to help one of the Going Long family today?
Yeah, so you're right. Mistakes happen daily. And being active in real estate or active in any investment, there's things that go wrong all the time. So there's a lot of lessons learned. I think the biggest one, if I could just kind of sum it up, is trust but verify. I use that phrase a lot. In investing in real estate and any other business, you have to lean on other people to be successful. You have a team, right? So you have to trust your team to execute, but you need to verify that they're doing what you expect them to do. And this is very, very key. And we got taken advantage of by a couple contractors very, very early on in the flipping side of the business. And so we have all kinds of checks and balances impacted in part of our business now that we never had in the beginning. So to keep it short and sweet, trust but verify in everything you do.
Yeah, and I think that comes from the mid '80s from an ex-U.S. well, not an ex now, but for a previous president. But so I appreciate you sharing that. And trust but verify. One of those things you definitely want to continue to do. And that brings us to question number 3. And this is really about helping to feed our brains with knowledge. And so I'm going to guess along the way, you've probably read a book or two. So I'd really want to know if you would share with us today, what's the one book that you would like to recommend to the Going Long family?
All right, so first and foremost, I'm a horrible reader. Like I just, my mom this is literally part of like book clubs, but I listen to a lot of audiobooks, so we'll go with this. And I'm going to go outside the box because it's probably not one that you would expect. But if you've ever heard of the book or audiobook, The Decision by Kevin Hart, and the reason why is it is such a kind of powerful mindset book actually that he puts together, but he puts it together in a way that's a really easy listen. And he just, it's funny because one, Kevin Hart's funny, right? And two, it just his phrases and his like, going through his life and how, he just said like, here's clearly what I went through and I had to overcome and what I have to overcome daily. I actually wrote down something down that one of my favorite quotes in the book, it says the one thing that consistently separates professionals from amateurs is, consistency separates professionals from amateurs. Sorry if I can actually get that out. But
you're doing your own comedy routine.
Yeah, exactly. But if anybody's never heard of that, give it a listen. It's really easy. Few-hour book. You can run with it on. You don't need a pen and paper type thing. It's just really all about mindset and strengthening your mind.
Well, you know what? I think it is the first. So The Decision of Kevin Hart, we will include that in the show notes as well. One of the things that I've seen, watching him as well, starting in comedy, but also having a lot of different impact in business. It so much revolves around mindset, and where your mind will allow you to go, your activities will follow, right? And so it is about making sure that you have an open mindset and the capacity to be consistently doing the things that we're going to progress or have you move forward. So appreciate you sharing that with us, Ross. And it makes me think about, whether you get started in Michigan, you move to Oregon, you go to Pennsylvania, and you're in Florida, and that's now where you're currently residing. And as you mentioned, you like a lot of people that are listening. You had a lot of window time, and you had things that were happening in your life. You shared with us what happened with your uncle, and you also talked about the fact that you just couldn't get your head around what was going on in the stock market. And so, running away from those kinds of things, you knew that you wanted to create a different life for yourself. And so, you talked to your wife, and the two of you have maybe differing views on things, but you decided to move forward together. And so, it all started with that first quadplex, I think it was, and then from there, you decided, hey, listen, you want to continue to do that, and you realized the importance of the velocity of money. You continue to work in your day job as you continue to expand your portfolio. I'm sure your days were a lot like mine at a certain point, where they started really, really, really early and they finished really, really, really late. But at the same time, you were able to recognize a lot of skills that you built in corporate. You're currently leveraging them as you're now focused 100% on your own business and helping to serve others. And you're continuing to do that through Follow the Deal Investments. I know that everybody, they just want me to go, Billy, just be quiet, please, and just ask them the question. So I'm going to ask you the question because everybody wants to know. Help us understand how we can find out more about you, Ross, and also more about the things that you're doing at Follow the Deal Investments.
Yeah, so I am, like I said, almost 40, which means I also suck at social media. You're much better at that than I am, but I am pretty active on LinkedIn, and that's probably the best way personally to get in touch with me. And if you want to learn more about our brand and what we're doing, followthedeal.com is the easiest way. Our business is really just about helping other people get involved and think differently about investing, about school, and about corporate America. So whatever you do, keep learning and hopefully find your passion, whether it's real estate or something else.
All right. Fantastic. Well, listen, Ross, on behalf of the entire Going Long family, I just want to say thank you very much for deciding to stop in today and to share your knowledge with us. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Billy. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. And if you give me 15 seconds, I'll get things wrapped up and get you out of here. So, Going Long family, listen, Ross just left it here for you. I mean, he shared the real life, his real life experience and the things that he did, whether it was moving to a different side of the country to being able to decide that, hey, listen, he was going to take this knowledge that he was hearing theoretically, put it into action. He is a recovering perfectionist like me. Although you didn't say that, but I'm going to put it out there. So for those of you that are very similar, take the things that he's talked about in the story, be able to listen to some of the parts that we talked about before. And most importantly, take action. Share today's conversation, the episode with your family, with your friends, and talk about the concepts that Ross and I talked about today and be able to take action. And heck, he's even given you a way to reach out to him and connect and continue the connection. So while you're taking those actions, I'll be here preparing for the next conversation. So until then, go out and make it a great day. And thank you very much.